picking up on something that Jan used to do when she was chair. And maybe just for everybody, just introduce yourself, but then say what's your most favorite thing you did this summer.
Starting with me. My name is Maggie Squire. I'm an assistant planner in the department. My favorite thing I did this summer was I got to spend a few days on a houseboat in South Dakota, so that was fun.
Got a mouthful, Aaron?
Yep. Aaron Nelson, City of Fargo planning staff. Didn't do a whole lot this summer, but probably just hanging out at the lake on a few weekends. That was my highlight.
My name is Luke Mormon. I'm the planning intern, and probably the most fun thing was week-long family reunion. That was in over 4th of July. So.
Kylie Bagley with the planning department. I had a newborn in March, so I got to spend 2 weeks in California with my family this summer, so that was nice.
Mark Williams, planning. I'd say it was the Bison game down in the cities with my family. It was fun.
Megan Elstow, planning department. I have a 2.5-year-old, and so we had taken her to swimming lessons before, but this summer is the first time she kind of gets swimming and what you need to do, and she loves it, so that's been fun.
I'm Donald Kress with the Planning Department. I tried my hand at gardening this summer, and with reasonable success, actually. So that was exciting to try.
You didn't bring anything to sell. I mean, you didn't bring anything.
Well, if I didn't know how many tomato peppers you needed, but I'll try to save some for next time, sir.
All right.
Miranda Tassa, Planning Commissioner. I'd say lakes. Nothing too exciting this summer.
Mike McGelkey, Fargo Planning Commission. Probably the lakes also. I have 5 grandchildren, and it's kind of nice when they come down, but it's kind of nice when they don't come down too. They come down, they spend a week, or one weekend, then the next weekend my wife and I have to recuperate, so then they stay at home. But, it's funny how they didn't want to go inner tubing, and all of a sudden now they all want to go inner tubing, and now and then the oldest one's starting to learn, so it's fun.
Dawn Morgan with Planning Commission. I usually measure my happiness with how much I can get done in the summer, because there are certain things you can do. I always see myself as like a farmer who gets to quit, freeze up. So I just push all summer to get stuff done, and 2 of the things I did get done at the lake this summer were to cut a wide path up through the woods. It's like one of those this big now, so that it's a really nice walk up through the woods and back and around. And it's hard to maintain. I've kept it up for years, but some years it gets overgrown, and so that was really nice. And then I have a lot of company in the summer that comes to my place and my mother's place, my 98-year-old mother who lives down the road. And so I bought a pergola for my deck down by the water, and it improved it 100% because it was always too hot to be down there and glare and by the water. And I bought this pergola. It's not the usual kind, but it's very nice, and it's just made a world of difference in terms of like actually discovering a space that hadn't been of great use in the past. So I like that sort of thing where you find a new use for something that's been around you for a long time. So that made me happy.
I'm Jennifer Holtz with the Fargo Planning Commission. I guess my favorite thing I did this summer was I went to adult summer camp with the Unglued crew.
Oh.
My name is Brenda Derrig. I'm a city engineer, and my favorite thing I did this summer is I have a sister who lives in Sweden that was home for 6 weeks, so I got to spend some time with her and her family, so that was the highlight of my summer.
Nicole Crutchfield, planning director, and probably my favorite thing I did this summer is, well, we didn't do a whole lot of it. I've been playing golf for a while. My husband decided to pick it up, so we played golf together at a few rounds in Fargo, and so that was probably the best part of the summer.
You got to teach them.
No, he's already better than I am.
Let him know that, yeah. John Dunkelman and I. I have 8 grandchildren in Fargo, and under 8, and we have a lot. For them, you could pull tubing, plus they like grandpa to ride in the middle, which I'm scared, and the 2.5-year-old grandsons are laughing, and I anyway, but,
Scott Stoffern.
oh, your favorite thing,
Yeah,
you didn't
favorite
get the
thing.
hint from this,
Yeah, I'm trying to pick this out as we go, yeah. Well, after 2 years of remodeling a house at the lake, this year we didn't do that anymore, we were done.
Use it.
Got to use it, and that was fun because we had a lot of family out there and lots of cooking and enjoying company. And but in terms of what was probably the most fun was when my daughter had a reception for a wedding out by Boston. And then after that, we went up to Maine and stayed in it with our whole family. It would be my brother, my sister, brother-in-law, their families, our extended family, and we all stayed at this vacation rental by owner in Maine, right along the coast, and it was just really, really fun.
Well, good. City Commission case update.
Well, perhaps I'll just do a quick update. Most everything has been status quo, so meaning that as it proceeds through Planning Commission, it moves to City Commission. And, so kind of status quo as it goes from Planning Commission through City Commission process, and nothing too controversial except for the bed and breakfast. And that's probably, as you remember, at the Planning Commission received a split vote. It did get appeal, but it did get supported by the Planning Commission. I believe it was 5-3 or something in that nature. And so it did get appealed the next day and went on to the City Commission. It has been continued. We had probably similar testimony at the City Commission that you heard at the Planning Commission. The City Commission chose to table it, and it may be up for, it's tabled to this coming Monday. And so, and then at that point, it's still maybe questionable if it will be heard on Monday. Maybe all the parties might not be able to be present on Monday, so we're still kind of fine tuning that. But that's probably the probably primary part. I don't know, Donald, if you have anything to add at City Commission level. So.
All right.
I'd like to say something about that. One of the things that is part of that case is that South 8th Street has gone through many different phases, but originally it was the wealthy that lived in those big houses, and for a while it was deemed that they would be demolished eventually after having been turned into apartments. The Hawthorne Neighborhood Association is concerned about so many of the big old houses that are still kept in some of the families, but that the people aren't there very often. They're gone in the winter, and then in the summer they have lake places. And so the depiction of the neighborhood is being, you know, having little kids running in and out of these mansions, so to speak, and off to Hawthorne is really not the case any longer. And I'm a proponent of trying to incorporate other things into the neighborhoods that make them more neighborhood friendly, for one thing, but also as a way to kind of begin to see how these neighborhoods age and what can be done to assist them. So the Nelsons have had that house for sale for 15 years. They haven't been able to sell it. The people who comment about it, who want it to stay as it's been, say, well, the only thing we want here is a single family with children, because we need children in our neighborhood. But because of the fact that they've put so much money into the house, they can't sell it for a lot less. Nobody will buy it for that amount. if they did drop the sale price, the price for maintaining it is so high on an annual basis that somebody who got in there inexpensively wouldn't be able to keep the house up. So it's kind of one of those things at the planning meeting. I think you all remember that Rocky said, you know, he looked at how many Airbnbs there are. They're everywhere. But then with a bed and breakfast, his comment was the only difference is the breakfast. And so I'm really encouraging neighborhoods in this planning process too, for the core neighborhoods, to begin to think about how to make these neighborhoods more vital and adapted to the times. And, you know, instead of marginalizing them and saying that they have to be this or they have to be that, that there could be some really good creative options. And that's why I would be in favor of allowing the Nelsons to do the bed and breakfast.
But I have a comment or a question. There was a comment made at that city, or that planning commission meeting, that they don't need a license to have a bed and breakfast. Is that true?
And if we may, I don't want to talk about the case too much since it's an open hearing item, and scheduled for Monday night, and there's a lot of moving. I've spent literally probably about 20 hours this week on the case, and probably amongst staff last week, we spent probably a good 40 hours on the case. And so I would just say that some of the discussion on Airbnbs as a company, and that's a whole different thing. And so that's basically an uncensored city, not city uncensored business that is happening, right? And part of their business model, but it's outside of city governance. So the example I use is just because, you know, my speed limit on my street is 25 miles an hour, if I perhaps drive at 40 miles an hour and a police officer isn't there to stop me, I'm still going against the law, right? And so it's the same example about Airbnb, still not per law, but if we're going to go around policing Airbnb as an industry or as an operation, we would want to talk to the city commission about that and figure out what kind of staff resources that would take, and an initiative and a directive as such. So that's kind of where we're at with the whole difference in Airbnb. And so what the Nelsons, the owners, like to do is say that they're trying to abide by the law and go through the associated processes as part of a bed and breakfast, per se.
Well, I think one thing that Dawn was talking about is, and I've struggled with this for 3 or 4 years, that, you know, the last 3 or 4 years, it seems like the Roosevelt, I mean, it's the core neighborhoods. How do you revitalize the core neighborhoods? How do you get these houses? I mean, if you buy one of these houses, you've got to put a ton of money into them, and you're never going to get it back out of it.
Mike, we got the answer for that.
What's that?
We are in the process of, in fact, this week we've been listening to the core neighborhood consultants that we're down to 4 that we'll be interviewing, and they are being charged with studying actually there's 9 core neighborhoods, and trying to come up with just the answers that, you know, kind of trying to get their concerns, try to come up with a plan that will hopefully make the neighborhood, make our decisions on the planning commission easier, and also give them the feeling that they've got to buy in to preserving their neighborhoods. And so we are in the process of doing this. This will take all next year and probably come back with a consensus probably by the end of next year, but you'll be off the planning commission by then, so
yeah, so
the rest of us get to utilize the...
I can't worry, so I shouldn't worry about it, is what you're telling me.
Well, no, but I mean, I think a lot of us have struggled with exactly what you're asking, and I think we're really hoping that through this consensus, and it's quite, when you look at the work plan that they put together and how they try to draw the information out, I'm really excited that we'll have maybe a game plan going forward in about a year and a half. So that's a little update on what's going on behind the scenes. I probably stole your thunder, but.
That's all right.
Oh, could I say one more thing? You know, it's something we haven't really talked about, but there are some people have talked to me about it quite a bit, but, you know, in addition to the Airbnbs and the bed and breakfasts, the older neighborhoods used to always have a lot of neighborhood groceries around the schools, and I've read reports of like which kids from a certain school would go to which grocery stores or the little neighborhood corner store because that's where their friends went. And I also remember that back in those days there were lots and lots of women who had beauty salons in their neighborhoods, and I always used to kind of laugh about it and talk about beautiful women in basements because they'd be these very flamboyant women with orange hair and lots of eyeshadow, but they had a lot of business because people would go to have their hair done and their nails done. And so there's been some thought about, even with some of Kilbourne's proposals, to start creating a little bit more business activity in the neighborhood, such as like having a shop below and living studio space above. I think there's a couple of them that have already been developed over in the Oak Grove neighborhood without any backlash. So the kind of thing that I'm thinking about, like over in Oak Grove too, there used to be a chicken place that you could go to and
Chicken
Done.
Delight, I remember that.
yes,
Yep.
and remembering those places in the neighborhood that weren't just stuck as being this description of a neighborhood, but they actually had things going on in them, which made those neighborhoods much more interesting to grow up in. So anyway, that's just my comment, is I would hope that there's some movement in that direction, even, you know, whatever it might be, just a little gourmet deli place with a wine and beer license, or just places for people, walkable places for people to go in the neighborhood, so.
All right, anything else? Okay, updates on the October Planning Commission case updates? Donald?
Commissioners, you might recall at the last, the September 3rd Planning Commission, your commission moved to continue the Timber Creek 3rd Edition zone change case. That's where there were those 7 lots that the applicant proposed to change from SR2 to SR3. There was some testimony. There was testimony included in your packets. There was some live testimony, and then also Mr. Dabbert presented, he's the developer, presented his situation. We have scheduled a neighborhood meeting for that project on Tuesday, the 24th, 4:30 to 6:30 in the Meadowlark Room. You got an email about this. I hope you all got my email. I know some of you might not be able to attend, but it's always nice to have a commissioner or two there. Again, you're not required to. No decision, no vote is taken, no decision is made, but it's the idea that the neighborhoods can converse with the developer. The planning department sort of manages the meeting, just to give some background, and just to have them have that interaction, which apparently had not happened prior to the planning commission meeting, and we believe that was your commission's intent to get the developer with the neighbors at that point. Also on the agenda, there's one case that was continued from this summer. We're still working with the applicant on a CUP in the extraterritorial jurisdiction. And then there's, I believe, 4 new cases, 3 subdivisions, and a zone change. Fairly straightforward. There might be a couple questions on a couple of the items, but we'll cover any concerns we have in our staff report and in our presentations. And then, Commissioner, we'll meet with you and Commissioner Snyder sometime next week, Thursday or Friday, as an agenda preview.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, sir.
Any other updates from anybody? Okay. All right, moving on to the the topic today is I think with we have a fair amount of new commissioners, it might be nice even for some of us, the old ones, to look at a project from start to finish. When somebody brings a piece of property, probably gets annexed, and then a developer then will be, what are the, let's say, normal steps, and then who's going to take the ball with this one? Donald?
It's on your PowerPoint here, so. I didn't quite go back to annexation. Yeah, Commissioner Gunkelman and I discussed this how to do this topic and a couple times, and unfortunately, we couldn't get a developer here so we could sort of act it out, but we'll try to summarize this for you here. Excuse me. You all see screens, right? Okay. So, Commissioners, as Commissioner Gunkelman indicated, there's a lot of stuff that the staff does that, excuse me, that you don't ever get a chance to see. This is kind of a fancy chart here, but just to give you an idea of how many times before we get to your commission that the staff interacts with the developer. This, again, a little wordy here, but you know, their initial contact, people give us a call or email, discuss the nature of the project. As Commissioner Gunkelman said, sometimes they start as early as annexation on property that's not even in the city yet. And we give them some background and they decide, all right, well, I want to go forward with this, or well, maybe not. Our next move is always to schedule a pre-development meeting. This includes many city staff. Brenda Derrick is here. She and her staff are big players in the pre-development process, as well as Public Works, Fire, and inspections to some degree. We bring them in, meet with us. They talk about the proposed project and revisions, direction, complications they might run into that they might not be aware of. For instance, you might recall that recently we did a project with, well, it was just last month, a project with Jesse Craig on 7th Avenue, which is along the county drain. Well, Jesse actually came to us many months ago starting that project, but dealing with the drain is something that not just the city does, but the Southeast Cass Water Resources District deals with. So we had to coordinate with that jurisdiction as well as our own. And then we had to have engineering in there. The applicant had to hire a geotechnical engineer that then our staff reviewed. So there's a whole, that's where you find out those things. And sometimes between the pre-development meeting and the application, there's a year worth of stuff to do in there. But eventually, ideally, the applicant gets his project, his or her project together there and actually submits an application. We take that in. There's a fee, of course, that goes with that. We usually talk to them briefly at that time. And then we do a completeness review. This is just a pretty simple thing. We take all their application materials, make sure they've got all the stuff they need. They have their title opinion and their graphics and their plat and just an overview. And then we let them know, we send them a letter that clarifies what their project is and that we've received these materials or if they need to provide some more. And then the case goes to the individual case planners. So we take them in and then we all look at them. Mark Williams and I do a lot of that too, just reviewing the cases and deciding who gets assigned what. And then the individual case planners use their knowledge and expertise to review those cases, contact the applicant, contact the neighborhood, anyone else who might be involved in that, have internal discussions with engineering or fire about the project. And then we bring all this together in what we call our preliminary packet meeting, where a bit of a replay of the pre-development meeting crew, where again we get engineering, fire, public works, inspections, and occasionally others involved in that meeting, and we all together go through our comments that we've made, and then the result of that is that the outcome of that is then we have comments to give and direction to give the applicant. We send that to the applicant. And we let them know they have to make these revisions or provide these materials or sometimes come in and meet with us or others by a deadline, usually only a few weeks in the future. And then we get to the point where we're ready to write the staff report and send that to your commission as part of your packet. And then by this time we'll have gotten all the comments back from the applicant. We've satisfied all of the departments are willing to go forward with this. Sometimes individual departments might have individual concerns that they're not ready to let this go forward for one reason or another. Sometimes planning does too. So, but the time we get to the staff report, we've got all that information together. We prepare that staff report, and then it goes forward in your commission packet. Just another thing that you don't really see. We have you hear us talk about Llama, which is our now computerized comment tracking and case tracking software. This is just one of the screens from Llama, but when we send out a planning case or a subdivision, for example, these are all the people who review it. You see different departments there, and even within the departments, Brent Watch, our surveyor, Tom Naglus, our assistant city engineer, Dan Eberhardt, our special assessments director, 3 or 4 people sometimes from each department look at that and review it. And then their comments, we have our comments page on Llama looks like this. These are some of the comments that we would make. Fire department commented here, planning commented here, Cass County Electric sent in a comment here. This is on an upcoming project that you'll see in a couple of weeks. So that's what all the contact we have with the applicant prior to sending out our staff report. And then to pick up on our original idea, what we don't have is sort of a handy step-by-step visual of development of a project because it's kind of a punctuated and not always straight line way of doing things. But we'll take ones that some of you are familiar with, and I saw some of you commissioners were not here when we did this. This is the Diamond Willow project. This was on 10th Avenue and 7th Street North. It was a project to take 2 existing houses, tear them down, and put in 6 townhomes. Nate Anderson was the applicant for this. So this is the project site in July 2017. Here are the 2 houses here. They were not in good shape. Actually, we were on the verge of condemning them. The applicant owned them and said, well, we're going to revise this project. So he came to us with a plan here. You might remember this is June 2017. They're going to have 7 townhomes here, 3 here, 4 here, and this driveway with the big lot in here. Is this looking familiar to anybody here, commissioners? Remember this one at all? And that went, we reviewed that with the applicant, and they cleaned it up a little bit, sent the same thing to the September 5th Planning Commission packet. But we had some recommendations, and we don't need to necessarily read all the details of this, but staff had some recommendations that went along with that, and that we were somewhat at odds with the developer, that they had one vision, we had another one. So we included that. And then we met with the applicant to talk about the vision of that. And this was just a sketch that Mr. Anderson did, sitting at the table with Nicole and me one afternoon, of a different configuration they could have. So now instead of having 7 townhomes, now there are 6 with 2 facing 10th Avenue and 2 facing 7th Street. Well, there was still some more continuation to this. It was continued October 3rd, and then we went forward with working with the applicant some more and got a different design. So now we've got 3 facing 10th Avenue, 3 facing 7th Street. We're down to 6 now in that configuration. This is what went finally on October 3rd. There was still discussion. At the time, the applicant was still working on revisions, and so we continued it to November 7th, 2017. And then, or no, November 2nd, sorry. And then that same 6-lot configuration went forward there, and then finally to the March 26th City Commission. Plat was approved, planned unit development was approved. You might remember there was a PUD on this. And then, so that was March 26, 2018. Finally, their final plan came to your commission on August 6, 2019, almost over a year later, which was the detailed plan, a little more detailed plan of what has happened. And Mr. Anderson's company has demolished those properties, and they have foundation-only permits. They're digging out there. They're probably pouring concrete by today. They were digging out there on Friday when I went by. So this is the site. So you see that even with all the lead into that, all the, those many steps in my chart there that talks about how we work with the applicant, even during the process, that even a small project like that can evolve considerably. So is that, Commissioner Coughlin, is that what you had in mind there for?
Go back to your original chart.
Yes, sir.
The question here is that I think I would ask was, how does the zoning get assigned to let's just say you're bringing a piece of property, and I'm going back to annexing.
Yes, sir.
If a piece of property comes into the city, and I'm thinking of like the stuff along 25th out by Davies or something, how does the initial zoning get assigned to that piece of property?
This is where your future land use plans come into play. Some of you, or hopefully most of the commissioners are familiar that we have the 2007 future land use plan, and there are maps in that plan that show north and south. It's called Tier 1 Northwest, Tier 1 Northeast, Tier 1 Southwest, and Tier 1 Southeast. And those have general land use designations on them: industrial, low-density residential, high-density residential, so on. And then there are zones that match those. Those are not zones themselves, but they are general land use descriptions. So where it says, you know, for example, along 25th, or on the east side of 25th, where John Eunice's company did Madeline's Meadows.
Yep.
That land use designation, I believe, was low-density residential. Well, that could be SR 1, 2, 3, 4, probably 5. So then, as we work forward with that, the developer says, well, I'm trying to have smaller lots, have, you know, lower special, smaller lots. Would the zoning of SR 4 fit in there? Well, we evaluate with them and say, well, yeah, that'd be okay to do that. And so that's how that goes forward. Occasionally, your commission sees a growth plan amendment or growth plan change. One of these was done, I believe, when we did Mid-America Steel, when we put Mid-America Steel on 19th Avenue North, that it was a commercial land use designation, they needed an industrial, or they're actually, the property they bought was split. It was part industrial and part commercial, and it needed to be all industrial so they could do that. And the growth plans have that mechanism in them to go through a modification. There's, as with all our decisions, there are findings to be met, and we work through the applicant. Occasionally, people come to us with plan amendments that we don't support, and occasionally they want to go through with them, but often they revise their plan or find another area that they can work in. And Nicole, you have some more comment there?
Maybe just to add to that real quick. So there's two components that go with the zoning. So if you're raw land, say down south of Madeline's Meadows, at the time of annexation, we would look at what is the appropriate zoning district to assign as when it's
And that's
brought
the
into
starting spot.
That's the starting spot, except for the growth plan previously to that. So we have an adopted growth plan from '07, and that talks about what we suspect those land uses will be. So we suspect those land uses might be commercial, or might be residential, or industrial, and the categories are open space, and those categories are about as generic as that. And then, like Donald said, about 6 or 7 categories. And then at that point, once it comes annexed, the developer's like, yeah, I do agree with that growth plan, or I don't agree with that growth plan. And so you just saw a growth plan amendment, I believe, with the, I don't know if one was done with the hospice. Maybe Maggie just did one recently, right?
Yeah, the Pines at the District Edition did a growth plan amendment from like a moderate residential to a commercial zone for that hospice house.
Yeah, so that's an example where when that land was brought in originally, what was it changed from, the residential? Yeah, so we were thinking probably medium density, high density residential near the interstate, near 52nd Avenue, near the Walmart, you know, a higher density residential of some sort. And then fast forward 15 years or so, and that land's finally ready to be developed. The original developer is not there anymore. I think that was Pace's Lodging originally. And so a whole different group of people we're working with. And the hospice story is actually one of my favorite, because they came in looking at a different tract of land altogether. So the owner and their lawyer, Dan Boydie, had been looking for property for a year. They had a certain set of specs that they try to meet. They need so much acreage, they need so much open space, et cetera, et cetera. So they were looking at some land outside the city limits. And they met with Brenda and I and a few other members of our staff, kind of high stress looking for land. And we knew we weren't going to be able to get utilities to the part of land that they needed quickly. And they had some timelines they were trying to project for, and capital campaigns, et cetera. And so I actually teased, so the hospice was just approved at City Commission. They showed that same video that was well received. But I joked with Brenda afterwards, like, did you get a commission on that deal? Because she was, when the group, you know, I'm being facetious, of course. We really don't get commissions. But, but, you know, knowing the parties in play and what they're looking for, Brenda knew, you know, that there was a big tract of land in the Pines area that might be a good use for that. And so at that point, they introduced that, you know, have you thought about this parcel? You know, we do have utilities there. All you would need to do is a growth plan change and a zoning change. And we think that staff could support that, you know, based on that. And so sometimes we help developers get to that next step. And sometimes they already have their plans well vetted, especially, you know, that's a nonprofit owner. They're not used to development versus someone who's doing it all the time. And so So that's before so that was maybe 2 or 3 months prior to that initial contact to the planning staff, so based on Donald's chart. But, so even, backtracking before then, hey, what are we trying to do? So we always encourage developers to, when the idea is just kind of a speck in your mind, never hesitate to reach out to us, and you might be surprised what you find at that process.
I take it that's why when the stuff out at 100th Avenue started popping up on the west side of the interstate, we try to avoid that because you're not sure what's going to come up against it in the future.
Exactly. And so going back to that growth plan, we have a timeline when we think we're going to get those utilities down there. And so when developers get ahead of us is when we get really nervous because we're just not equipped to get down there quickly. And so that might mean a change of plans, or to change our priorities, or to change the capital improvement plan. And so we just can't, as an organization and with city tax dollars, we just can't turn quickly and into a new, so we try to stay ahead of it. Just last week, or just this week actually, speaking of as those growth projections start to happen, Mark met with the Fargo School District's demographer, right? They're looking, I don't know, how many years ahead are you looking at that point in time? What? Many years ahead, and so they're way out ahead, and so we try to be forward thinking and not be caught by surprise on certain statistics and demographics. But one of my dreams of this roundtable of Planning Commission, we need to do it for a couple other components, would be though to have a roundtable with developers and you as a Planning Commission to talk about the development process. What works well in the development process, what doesn't work well in the development process, what gets sticky, what is quick, and we're all thick-skinned, we try to do the best we can, but we're always open for improvements. And the Land Development Code update is going to be a good opportunity to talk about those processes in more specifics. But so in that case, because our growth plan will be needing to be updated soon. As adopted in 2009, and the tier before that was adopted in 2001, and so, we start to look at that, beyond 52nd, 64th Avenue, with the population projection at metro-wide at 300,000, at our growth, at our final, there's a lot of unknowns as we move to the future.
Is anybody, another topic down the road to kind of tie into this would be, when does a developer go for a PUD, a CUP, whatever the other acronyms are that and to try to understand that process, so that when we see that they're asking for a PUD, you kind of wonder sometimes. Staff usually does a good job of explaining it, but we might not always understand that process. So down the road, we'll tie that into another brown bag, the other one. Has anybody got any questions? I mean, I don't think we always understand that staff puts a lot of time in ahead of us getting, this Jesse Carrig project over by Oak Grove, that's been 3 years from when it first started with a different.
Yeah, how long have you been on that case, Aaron?
Yeah, it might even be more than 3.
How long you been here, Aaron?
Yeah, there's at least 2 different developers on that same property.
But I think we get every once in a while, when as you've been on here, you'll see that, that piece of property, sometimes we'll approve something and it doesn't get done too. And that happens occasionally, and I know it will come back to us and you'll think, haven't we seen this before? Anybody got any questions about this, that they're, hopefully it's filling in some holes with.
I have a question on, when are there neighborhood meetings? Is there, you know what I mean? Because sometimes the last one, is it when there's opposition, then there's a neighborhood meeting, or is that
I can give you a very cloudy, clear
Sure.
explanation on that. part of our job is to understand the neighborhoods and to understand what's being proposed and how accepted it's going to be within that neighborhood. As developers come in, and we know something from a previous planning commission meeting or just something else going on, we'll warn them saying this is going to be difficult in the neighborhood. And when we know for sure there's going to be issues and they've applied for whatever they're planning to apply for, then we'll schedule a neighborhood meeting. A lot of times we'll have them schedule their own neighborhood meeting before they even submit any application into us, so they can get the feedback from the neighborhood kind of without us sort of running it. But then we also, we'll have quick neighborhood meetings when we do our required mailings, and all of a sudden the phones light up and people are concerned, something that we completely missed that we thought there was going to be a smoother process. And then so once we start getting some extensive negative feedback, that's when we'll quickly put together another neighborhood meeting prior to the planning commission meeting. And throughout time, it's pretty good practice, but our job is to try making these meetings go as smooth as possible. And it takes a lot of work sometimes with some of the opposition to do that. But on the other hand, working with the neighborhood and trying to be that mediator helps us try reducing the time to try getting to a common consensus, because usually what will happen is it goes to planning commission and they say, well, once you guys, we'll continue this and we'll go have a neighborhood meeting and talk about it. And we'll warn those developers to that, because a lot of times they're under a timeline that they want to rush, and it's like, well, if we don't have this neighborhood meeting, here's what's going to happen. We're going to go to planning commission and they're going to say, you guys need to talk about this a little bit more. And then we're going to extend it out one more month. So does that answer the question on that?
Well, I think you touched a little bit on the fact that if it's very questionable, before the developer spends a lot of money, he'd probably like to get a feel of the landscape, so to say, or the neighborhood. I'm just backing up. I think I've been to 3 or 4 of Jesse's different meetings, Jesse Craig's, and were some of those even before he really narrowed up his game plan, just to, I think, get a feel for what the neighborhood would possibly accept. I mean, I think people also, you got to understand, and I come from the building side of things, but a developer puts a lot of money into this process. I mean, you spend a fair amount of money developing plans, especially as you get towards the end. And so if you can eliminate some of the changes you might have to make up front, and really, because as we've seen, almost everybody that's had a neighborhood meeting probably ends up with some kind of compromise. If we go back to Ponyland, initially we weren't probably looking at having, I think if we ended up with 23 lots, I forget what, we ended up with 23 residential homes as kind of an offshoot of the neighborhood meetings. So the sooner you get to know what the neighborhood's going to accept and not be fighting them tooth and nail all the way through our process, although we haven't seen it in too many years, have the commission overturn what we've either passed or rejected. So the neighborhood meetings are, it's interesting sometimes. It just amazes me sometimes of the ones I've been to, like the one across from the shack at NDSU. There were one couple, and that's the person whose house is still there. That was the son of the lady whose house is still there. And we had 2 other couples there. We only had about 6 people at that meeting. And you go 8 blocks north and we get into, or south, and you get into the Roosevelt neighborhood, it's a whole different, so that's why every once in a while, if you have the opportunity to get to these neighborhood meetings, it gives you a little bit of insight, when they're well attended, I should say,
We're trying to do better to invite you with more notice, and so sometimes those meetings come around really quickly, and we are trying to make it standard practice. We just made that, I kind of made that clarification with the staff just last week, because sometimes it's a little ambiguous if you want to know as commissioners, and so we just made that kind of universal decision that we should notify you every time we have a neighborhood meeting, so that you can choose to come or not come, and no problem either way. Just you know, some have different availability and interest. So, so you should hopefully, you might see more invitations come through. Just sometimes if they're small, like say on the bed and breakfast, we're really just dealing with, you know, working with 3 property owners, and so to invite the entire planning commission might make it seem a little dominating, you know, and so, you know, but for the most part, they're universal, open, and trying to make that pretty transparent.
Yeah, that being said, the goal of these meetings too is even if we can't get consensus prior to the meeting, we're able to sort of flush out the accusations or the wrong assumptions, and so everyone's kind of talking in the common language of straight up facts for the case. And that helps a little bit more, even if there's contention in front of the Planning Commission.
One question for Mark, too. I've heard in 2 of the neighborhoods where there have been developments coming through that identification of the periphery around for 300 feet around the project doesn't seem to be adequate for many of the people who have made complaints. They think that the entire neighborhood, or whatever, however that's determined, should be part of the discussion. Has there been any talk about that?
No, that is really dictated by law, and but we certainly could visit that topic when we're looking at the Land Development Code diagnostic.
One of the things we do, if we, in the code, if we do have a registered neighborhood association, notify them. So that's standardized in the process. So the neighborhood association will know, and depending on how good their communication is, help, you know, broaden that information out for us as well.
And so then the neighborhood association, they have, what is the equation of the opinions of the people within 300 feet or as opposed to the neighborhood association? Are they the same thing, or?
Yeah, so there's 2 things. One, by law, and this is coming up in our recent conditional use permit, by law for zoning ordinances, and you know, maybe Donald can quote this better than I can, but I think 20% of the land, geographic land area, 20% of that, if they are in protest, will mandate a supermajority vote at city commission, not at planning commission, but at city commission. All of our other cases are types of hearings that you have don't have a protest percentage. But we do, if, especially if there's dialogue happening and a lot of emails coming in, et cetera, you know, our city commission, our current city commission has made it very clear they want to know how many people, you know, where they live, you know, and so they're mindful of their constituents, of course. And so we go ahead and map that. And so some might fall within the 300-foot boundary, some might not be within the, might be outside the 300-foot boundary, but we go ahead and give all that information to the city commission. At that point in time, when we have a contentious case, staff's job almost reverts back towards a information sharing basis only, where we're saying, okay, commission, you have, here's all the data, here's all the information, here's everything we've heard, pros, cons, feedback, so that my job, what I tell the commissioners, my job is to make sure you don't have any questions and that you feel like you have what you need to make a vote. Because they have really hard decisions to make, and so at that point, it's about, do you have what you need to make your hard decision?
And that formula, or that idea in our ordinance is actually based on a state statute that requires that ability to protest in situations like that. Our wording is slightly different, but it's a Century Code statute.
But to Don's point, when we're in a neighborhood that doesn't have a neighborhood association, it's whether somebody's leading the bandwagon to either fight it, well, yeah, they're never doing it to support it. So, they're doing it to fight it. I mean, and so it's whether somebody, it's kind of, you know, like the Dabbert project, for instance, you saw that somebody probably went door to door to get signatures. And primarily those were probably in that 300-foot radius.
Commissioner Gunkelman, we've had neighborhood organizations in the past ask us for that map. We just generate it off our GIS. It's easy to do. Where that 300-foot is, and we believe they've gone and, you know, mailed those people or knocked on their door or contact them. So they're using that. We're all using the same radius there. Right. So we're all looking at the same amount of property owners.
And the Timber Creek project is an example of it. Again, I don't want to talk too much about it since it's still open hearing or open item, but you know, we worked with 2 different property owners there, or 2 different potential applicants. I think you saw 2 different companies come in front of you. And we know, based on the history of that property area, that the Fox Run neighborhood is really organized, as well as homeowners in the Timber Creek area are really organized, just based on past experiences. And so, you know, first thing we say to the applicant is, you do recognize this is going to generate controversy, right? You know, you do know this is going to be a process, and make sure they don't, because sometimes they come in with this expectation of, why can't a decision be made in 2 weeks, and why is this taking so long? And you know, sometimes, so we try to set those expectations early on that it's not going to be easy, and they make their decision accordingly, and so, you know, I think in this neighborhood, you know, the developers are all well aware of what.
We sent them the previous staff reports, ma'am.
Yeah, there you go.
But yet they didn't have a neighborhood meeting before, right? Did they have one? Right?
No.
We're not aware that they did. We did encourage them to contact the neighbors.
But this is one thing, you know, we do have some, I don't know if you'd say a lot, but there are still a bunch of 80-foot lots, and that's the problem. They're not moving. So the lots that are moving are the narrower lots. And so they are trying to look at, you know, how do we manage that? And I think for me, it's one of those things of, they were zoned that way and platted that way, but there's also sometimes a desire of, should we have some higher density in some areas, and really, was that the right decision? And so those are some of the things we're seeing, is a lot of those requests coming forward. And then also the larger industrial lots, we're seeing a lot of lot splits in those, and trying to create more lots out of, instead of one big lot, they want to make them smaller, because maybe their original plan isn't quite panning out, and so they're trying to adjust to what is being requested of them, of those lots, which sometimes provides more hurdles, and trying to figure out the right path, which takes a little more time to figure out what is the right path to move those forward.
Playing off what she just said, the reason that the Dabbert project comes to bear, taking 80-foot lots, and if you, a duplex has one sewer and water service. If you go to townhomes or even twin homes,
yes,
they have separate sewer and water services. So if that was already stubbed in for an 80-foot lot, you don't have to go back in. We haven't seen very many duplexes. This is actually the terminology of a duplex. This is something new, and I think that's why I think the developer was maybe thinking it might be something. But I think that's where I think when we had this come to us before, I think there was the cost of bringing in now a whole nother set of, you know, street cuts to bring in sewer and water for each of the 40-foot lots.
mm-hmm.
So that's where you'll hear the discussion once in a while. And I learned something actually once in a while. I do learn something in my old age, but that how that works with it, you know, between twin homes, townhomes, and zero property lines, and when it's a duplex, somebody owns the whole structure. So that was kind of that was a good meeting for me 2 weeks ago. So, any other questions on, or something that's confusing to you that we've been seeing?
No, ma'am, I don't. And I don't, Commissioner Gunkelman, I just didn't know if Brenda had any more comments on the development process that her department plays such a big part in.
Do I have any more comments?
Well, yeah, I just thought, we invited you here. We thought I'd give you an opportunity to comment there.
I don't get to talk to Brenda very often, so
If it's going to be a potentially controversial project, and the developer knows that up front, is it, I mean, do they sometimes think, okay, I know this is gonna be controversial, there's gonna be resistance to the community, but I'm gonna make it a more aggressive project to begin with, so I got someplace to back off to? Do you sense that quite a bit?
I don't know.
They always seek to surprise me, and that's probably my biggest frustration, even in this current case I'm working on, is like trying to, with any negotiation game, trying to figure out where that line is. And so, we then think we've all defined the line, everybody in earnest has defined the line, and I think it's just human nature. And, then get to the public hearing and, oh no, there's new lines to be defined, and it takes everybody off their game. And so, I think, I was just, I don't want to speak on behalf of the city commissioners, but just it's no secret, we're gonna unpack the Newman case as we go into the land development code and core neighborhood planning process. That's the most recent I don't think anybody's been happy with that process. And so as we talk about that, I think it was surprising to all parties involved where that line ended up being. And if I could have, taken a quarter every time, Roars was like, no, absolutely not. This is our line, and then find a new line. And so I don't think they do it. I think they do it in earnest. They think they've defined their line, and then when they run the numbers again and the push, and then they start, as John was saying, get more money invested, then that line keeps moving, and then and I don't think anybody does it intentionally. I think it's just part of the human discussion.
I think it's like anything else. A developer, I tend to think that I think they know what their bottom line is. So they're gonna say, okay, if I was gonna put up 100 apartments, and I know I'm gonna probably need to make some concessions, I know that I can go down to 80 and still make this thing work. They know their numbers. I mean, most of the people that you'll see a lot of the same names come before us, and it's a business. I mean, they're not coming before us to lose money. I mean, we can do that on our own. But they, so I think they are. I think they have in the back of their mind what their concessions might be. It was interesting to me on the Newman project was we ended up with less townhomes than we originally started with. We started with, I think, when we were at 14, and we're down to 11, and they're initially only going to build 7.
Yes, sir.
Right?
Yes, sir, that's correct.
So it's just interesting how that, I think the 14 townhomes came into play to make it more interesting to the neighborhood. And then after the negotiating with the neighborhood, they go down to 11, and they're starting with 7, and if they sell, they'll build the other 4.
Commissioner Stauffer, we always tell people very early in the process there that you're going to a public hearing, there is no guaranteed outcome. Despite what staff's recommendation may be, despite what you may believe, it's a public hearing and there is no guaranteed outcome. We can't promise you how the commissions, either your commission or the city commission is going to vote. We make that clear to them up front. So, and some people, they know that. But that's an important thing to understand, that even with all the staff review and a recommendation and no protest from the neighborhood, people could show up at the hearing that we've never met. You might recall when we did the townhomes at Shadow Crest, that was a John Eunice project, and the gentleman just called us that day about the trees on the property. Remember that? It was about a year ago. And we had never heard from that gentleman and his friend until 11 o'clock that morning at the day of the hearing. And that got shot down, the applicant withdrew it, and that was the end of that project. So you never know how that's going to happen. That took us all by surprise. So.
All right, let's see, update on the LDC diagnostic?
Yeah, I'll do B and C real quick, and then maybe toss it over to Aaron if you have anything else to add or any questions from anyone. But update on the land development code, I guess last Monday, the city commission did approve the contract with Lisa Weiss and Consulting. So I think we had like 9 companies submit, around 9 companies submit for the land development code. We shortlisted that down to 6 to do telephone interviews, and then narrow that. And then the 2 front runners ended up so far ahead of the others that we actually shortlisted it to 2 for interviews. And those interviews were open to the public. Unfortunately, it was also during street fair, and I think we had 1 member from the public, Mr. Harold Thompson, that showed that came. But it was great because he came to both of them and was able to ask some good questions to our consulting companies. And on the selection committee was Mr. Gunkelman, Eric Johnson, Bruce Charlson, our building official, Mark Williams, and I think we had 5, Michael Redlinger for our assistant city administrator. And I think the last 2 candidates, maybe John can explain to it more, but the last 2 companies were like, in my mind, neck and neck. It was really just about fit and maybe flexibility of the firm itself. And really excited with this team. The proposals are available online. We'll soon get kind of a dedicated web page where we'll have some more updates. The land development code, this diagnostic phase, it's important to remember that it's there's going to be a lot of front-end analysis first to get their feet on the ground and understanding how we use the code, understanding what gets built as a result of the code. And then we'll, as part of this step, so we have our first kickoff meeting with them this Friday, and at that point we'll learn more about where the outreach is and how the engagement strategy and communication strategy will be designed and defined. Each consulting team had a slightly different approach. I imagine we'll have some aspect of a selection or steering committee and focus groups and topic areas, and it's about a 7-month process. Is that correct, Aaron? Anything else you'd like to add on?
No, I think you've kind of summed it up well. The only thing I would add is, as Nicole mentioned, they are really in their discovery phase, this over the first couple months. And so they are coming to Fargo, I think, a total of 5 times. This first meeting here this Friday will be just a kickoff meeting with staff to go over some of the organizational aspects of the study. But I believe their second visit to Fargo will be sometime in October, most likely. And that's the point in time where they'll probably have their first interaction with you all. I believe they have a work session that they'd like to sit down with the Planning Commission, maybe at a brown bag, maybe after a Planning Commission meeting, whatever maybe works out the best. So just know that that's coming, and keep your ear to the ground to learn more from us.
Aaron, explain just so everybody understands, this is the diagnostic portion of the LDC, which means that they're going to figure out where our strengths or weaknesses are, and then there'll be a consultant hired. One of you want to explain so everybody understands that later to take it from there?
If I can take a stab at that. So yeah, the purpose of this calling it the Land Development Code Diagnostic, really the intent with this study is to really get a sense of how well the Land Development Code is working, both from city perspective, staff perspective, Planning Commission perspective, developer perspective, public's perspective, just so we have a kind of a uniform understanding of what are the strengths and weaknesses of our current Land Development Code. And then kind of the second portion of this study too is we're asking the consultant to develop a set of alternatives or some, what's the best recommendation, having learned, what the status of the Land Development Code is, where do we go from here? And so I think a lot of folks think, it might end up being some revisions. We don't know, the extent of what those revisions or recommendations might be. That's all part of this process.
So probably 2 years from now, we will have what we would consider either an updated or a new land development code.
Possibly, assuming that they're going to find problems and
Oh, yeah.
assuming they're going to make recommendations that we need to fix.
And we don't do anything. But, okay,
Yeah.
I just wanted everybody to understand that we're not going to end up with a new one or a
A new code right
new
away.
code yet.
Yeah.
So, Okay, update on I kind of did the update on the core neighborhood plan, if you want.
Yeah, maybe just a quick highlight. Again, an opportunity to thank the planning team, Aaron's lead, and along with the rest of the staff. They met every 2 weeks, probably for the course of the last 8 months or so, where they kind of jointly as a team worked on a scope of work and expectations and definitions, both for the land development code and for the core neighborhood plan. And as from that, I would say 2 stellar RFPs, requests for proposals, and both of them got, companies from all over the country, really complementary teams, teams that complemented the work that Aaron and the staff did. And they're not just complimenting because they want the job. I think it's really mindful when we're talking about a community like ours. I used to be on the private industry to decide to submit. A firm will probably put in about $20,000 worth of services just to submit for a proposal. So to get someone to submit, especially from around the country, it's tough. It's a tough decision to make, and you're looking around the country to see where your dreams are. We had an extension, so we had about I think 13 submittals or 11 submittals for the core neighborhood plan. We shortlisted it to 6 or 7 to do phone interviews with, and just the other day on Monday, shortlisted it to 3. And probably the hardest decision, and probably maybe just as a point to comment on that, is both on the land development code and on the core neighborhood plan, one might wonder where the local firms are and how they compete, and is that an opportunity for them that we've overlooked? So I'll just say that 3 shortlisted firms are also from out of town, and some of them have local consultants on their team. But I'd be glad to talk to anybody else offline. We don't have any sole practitioners that are just planners, in Fargo, and so what that means is usually the planners that are in Fargo are part of a multidisciplinary team that includes engineers and architects or others. And that's not a bad thing. It's just that when we need such a heavy, deep dive in knowledge base, this is, we really need, if we're going to spend $100,000, we want every ounce of that to be on planning services from people who are trained and with planning degrees and have that best practice experience. And so, so with that, the national firms just we just don't have that local investment yet in the Fargo-Moorhead area. We're close, but not quite. And so, so just want to kind of put that out there. So the core neighborhood plan, we're really excited. I think all 3 firms, I don't think we can go wrong with any of those firms. Aaron's in the process of solidifying the interview dates. We're looking at the week of October 7th. They will be open to the public. They'll either be in this room or the Meadowlark room. And we would encourage you to come if you want to know more and watch and see the spectrum. We'll probably post the proposals online as well, the 3 proposals, so you can kind of take a look at those. So stay tuned on that. And we'll get those dates solidified as soon as we've got them. On that selection committee is John Gunkelman. We brought back Jan Alford Stewart. And if you remember, I think, Miranda, were you on I don't know if Jennifer or Miranda were on the commission when Jan was chair. So Jan has about probably 20 years of investment with the planning department and planning commission. With Shara's departure, we were kind of leaning towards someone who's had some kind of past historical perspective with the core neighborhoods. And then as well as Commissioner Strand and Commissioner Grinberg. And I think it's going to be really important to have their buy-in and understanding from day one on this project and the complexity on that project. Everybody agrees on this core neighborhood plan. Probably the one thing that kind of hemmed in the highest is the engagement and outreach component. And so I think all 3 of these firms are going to hopefully deliver a really unique approach to that component. So we're excited, and that would probably kick off, if all goes well, we have the interviews, be able to select, maybe by the end of November have a negotiated contract with a kickoff in maybe December, January, knowing that's right in the holidays, so seeing how that works for everybody's availability. But that's going to be more like a year-long process, year and a half process.
All right, update on the 2020 Census Complete Count Committee.
Commissioners, as you know, the United States Census is taken, census population is taken every 10 years. The next one is April 1st, 2020. In preparation for that, our goal, as the mayor has stated a few times in the media, our goal is to have 100% response to the census questionnaires. I don't know if anybody ever quite gets 100%, but that's our goal to do that, is to be able to facilitate that. There are a lot of new things in the census this year. I understand you'll be able to do some online responses as well. And so local communities like ours are encouraged by the U.S. Bureau of the Census to develop what's called a complete count committee. The complete count committee, despite its name, doesn't actually count anybody. But what they do is they facilitate outreach all across the community. And, you know, our community has a great variety of groups of all kinds in it. Some people have varying opinions on the census and varying familiarity with the census. Our goal as a complete count committee is to reach out, and the census has a lot of outreach materials for all kinds of situations that they'll provide. They work with us. We have our own census. We have a statewide census representative who's based in Jamestown. We've met with her a couple times, and we sent out letters last week by email to 20 people in the community that we've developed a mailing list in the planning department to be involved in this, who again are members of cultural groups or social service organizations who have a broad reach, the school districts, both university and public school, and have a representative on this to work together to develop a plan to disseminate this information about the census and encourage everyone to respond to that. We'll get their responses back by next week, and then in October, our census rep, Erin Musland out of Jamestown, will come and do some training with them all and work on developing a strategy. I talked to her yesterday, and she said we're doing pretty well on time with the Complete Count Committee. If we weren't starting until December, it probably wouldn't be good, but we're ahead of the game here, and we're ahead of the curve, so that's good. And if any of you commissioners would like to participate in that, please let me know. We don't have a final meeting schedule, but again, the object of the Complete Count Committee is not to sit around in meetings. It's to have some meetings, develop some strategies, and then, you know, be the outreach person and lead the outreach. So you're welcome to participate again. Just give me an email or a call, and we'll be glad to add you to that. Ma'am, did you have anything else for that?
I think everybody realizes that anything with federal funding, for sure, well, I think every kind of, anybody other than your own income, the census is very important for federal, state, local, county, whatever funding, especially planning ahead for monies. It's very important that they get an accurate count.
And all demographics, you know, marketing, anything, you know, financial, housing market studies, any of that stuff is based on census data. You know.
So, like I said, the mayor's goal is to have 100% response, and so that's what we're working for.
All right. Update on the Renaissance Zone.
I think Kylie and Megan might have some slides. I'm not 100% sure. No? Okay. So maybe just as a quick update, and knowing that we're close on time, just so you know, Megan and Kylie are working on a Renaissance Zone plan update. So this is technically our extension. Every 5 years, we're required to ask for an extension if we want to keep using the Renaissance Zone program. We did in 2014, we did an extensive update. That was the first one since the inception of the legislative rules. And so this update is going to be pretty minor compared to 2014. And really, we have a public open house tomorrow. And really, at that point, we've primarily just invited property owners that have Renaissance Zone, that they're within the Renaissance Zone boundary. And what we're trying to do is find out if property owners have projects planned, any future goals, those kinds of things. We only, by demographics, can assign 49 blocks. Most of those blocks are already assigned today, and so we are only removing one block, or suggesting we remove one block, and that's based on completion of but all the other blocks still have projects in motion. So we see a pretty minor update as part of this Renaissance Zone plan. So that's probably the main message for that. We'll have a more formal presentation to give you at Planning Commission probably in November. And as we kind of make the rounds, as we, part of the Century Code requirements are that we make a presentation and seek approval at a letter of support from the school district and the county as well. So you'll start to see more public announcements about it, and if anybody wants more information, we're gonna have a workshop with the Renaissance Zone Authority next week. But we should have a planned draft, probably first or second week of October. Again, pretty minor compared to what's already in existence today, but just wanna let you know we're working on that. Any questions or comments on that?
If anybody comes up with any topic ideas, please let myself or the planning staff know of any burning things that, no. But hopefully, these are informative, to help us make better decisions and know what we're making our decisions with some knowledge. So, one hot spot that transpired this week in a meeting that you and I were in, maybe sometime you'd do a short presentation on the UMU.
Sorry, that's the slide you're talking about. Yeah, yeah. No,
There seems to be a little controversy whenever we get together with the North Side group on the Roosevelt neighborhood about exactly what was involved when the university mixed use zoning went into place, and there seems to be two schools of thought on how to interpret what was done, and I think Nicole has, I'd like you to share, because I'm kind of interested in what was somewhere down the road.
Yeah, no, absolutely, we'll as part of the core neighborhood. But I think the important thing with all testimony is to remember how much of the testimony is based on emotion and change, right? Our part of our job is change management. We're changing. Society's changing. Nothing's staying the same. And so how we communicate and talk about that change at a citywide metro level and at the individual neighborhood level and at the individual block level, it's not going to be the same for each property owner and for each citizen and for each neighborhood. And so I think when we hear universal statements made, it's on behalf of an individual perspective, right? And so how that individual perspective sways the policy is really fascinating to me. And what people launch into or attached to as part of the decision making is really important. And it's important to break that down. And so as part of some side discussions on the core neighborhood plan, again, we always point back to the Newman case and what actually happened, what actually was the decision, and what actually was the debate. And if you start to break that down into really fundamental level, and from a plan, I'll just talk from a planning 101 perspective, meaning what we're required to do by law, what we're required to do as part of process, take apart all the emotion and all the change. We understand change is hard. We understand there's a lot of dynamics out there. And where can we isolate that influence of your power as planning commission and the power of the city commission? And so it goes back to that common vision. And that vision will help. My goal from the core neighborhood plan is that we get a unified vision, or at least a vision that's built through consensus of some sort. And right now, I think that's the weakest link, is that we don't have a consensus-built vision. And so as a result, how that influences the discussion, it's everything. And so,
one of the questions we asked the consultant is that we've been interviewing was, what's success to you when this core neighborhood plan is finished? And they've all kind of touched on the same thing, but the common thing with all of them was, I think, a level of trust with the neighborhoods that moving forward they'll have some groundwork. The planning department and commission will know kind of what was accepted and whatever, but I'm really looking forward to seeing where this goes.
And I'll just leave you with this thought. That's why engagement is going to be so important with it. And I'll just leave this with you, and then I'll be quiet. I think trust with the city, from the public's perspective, the neighborhood's perspective, and trust with staff is probably an all-time low. And I don't feel the trust. I don't feel the love, and I worry about our future ability to work in that climate. And so it requires some really good discussion. On a personal level, by all means, I feel the love. It's just, at the, so, and so it's just, but it's as a uniform.
She needs a hug when you leave.
Yeah, no, but it's just the uniform, the city, right? If I could take a shot every time I hear the city failed, it's hard not to take a personal attack to that. And
it's disheartening when you have, when you think you've reached a common. I mean, I thought the Newman project, and the two of them that have been probably in my time, in recent time, has been the Newman and Ponyland. And when you think you've reached some consensus and it goes through and it passes, and then you read the paper the next day that the neighborhood still thinks we suck, and, we go from there, but figuratively putting it, but, and now I got friends up by Ponyland. I had 3 very good friends in that Ponyland on 10th Street that lived in those townhomes or whatever they are. And kind of funny now when I have discussions with them, it's going pretty good. They're pretty happy with the outcome.
Or Edgewood Estates, all the traffic's gonna generate.
Yeah.
I haven't heard one peep out of anybody up there. I lost some friends over that stupid project, but.
So at the end of the day, if we're up 1, it's all right. You don't like getting picked on the next day in the paper after you thought you've done our group.
Well, you guys are all volunteers too.
Yeah.
That's the hard part.
Well, it's okay if they pick on you, but.
I was wondering with the core neighborhood plan that's coming up, are the consultants going to be working with the Park District and the schools? Okay, good. I was talking to someone recently that was talking about the bike routes and how there happen to be actually 3 different entities that are involved with them. The bike routes, and that there are 3 entities apparently that are involved with those routes, but they don't seem to be working together. And I would think that would be one of the goal of the consultants, to try to get the entities together so that there's a larger view.
All right, you're gonna get out of here a minute and a half early?